There's a unique kind of silence that follows the crack of a hand against a cheek. It's not just the absence of sound. It's a vacuum, sucking all the air, all the warmth, all the history out of a room. On my 80th birthday, my daughter Amelia gave me that silence as a gift. It came wrapped in the sting of her palm, and was sealed with a word whispered like acid, burden. She thought that was the end of the story. The final chapter of a long and, in her eyes, increasingly inconvenient book. What she didn't know, what she could never have imagined, was that the slap wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. It was the precise moment the diamond ring on my finger, a piece she had always dismissed as gaudy costume jewelry, began to burn with purpose. This isn't a story about getting old, or about family squabbles over money. It's a story about the quiet, meticulous architecture of reclamation. It's about how the woman they tried to discard built a fortress from the stones they threw at her. If you have ever felt underestimated, if you have ever been made to feel small so that someone else could feel big, then I need you to stay with me. This story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, settle in, and let me tell you exactly how a slap and a single word from my daughter led to me taking back not just my money, but my entire life. I promise you, the ending is worth the wait, because it's an ending I wrote myself, every last satisfying word of it. It's the story of how an old woman, a burden, proved that the heaviest thing she ever had to carry was her children's greed, and how she finally decided to set it down. The party, if one could call it that, was held in the beige-carpeted community room of Amelia's soulless suburban housing development. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. It was a room designed for transient, impersonal gatherings, which felt appropriate. There were about 15 people there, none of whom were my friends. They were Amelia and Mark's friends, the kind of people who talk about interest rates and vacation properties in the same breath they use to ask you how your hip is doing. They smiled with their teeth, their eyes scanning over my simple dress, my comfortable shoes, my entire existence, with a polite, dismissive sheen. Amelia had bought a sheet cake from a supermarket, the kind with frosting so sweet it makes your teeth ache. Happy 80th, was piped in garish blue across the top. It felt less like a celebration, and more like a box being ticked on a long and tedious to-do list. I sat on a hard plastic chair, a paper plate of the wretched cake melting in my lap, and I listened. I've always been a good listener. It's a skill you develop when you realize no one is particularly interested in what you have to say. They spoke around me, through me, as if I were a ghost at their feast. Mark, my son-in-law, a man whose spine seems to be made of gelatin and entitlement, was holding court. He was talking about the market, how it was the perfect time to level up. That was the phrase he used. Level up, he meant a bigger house, in a more exclusive neighborhood, one with a 3-car garage, and a kitchen island the size of a small boat. Amelia chimed in, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. We found the perfect place, she announced to their friends, gesturing vaguely, as if carving its layout in the air. 5 bedrooms, a pool, it's a bit of a stretch, but you only live once, right? Her eyes flickered towards me for a fraction of a second. It was a familiar pattern. The preamble. The carefully constructed stage play designed to lead to the moment they would ask me for money. For decades, it had been my role to sit quietly through the performance and then, on cue, deliver my lines. How much do you need? Of course, darling, whatever you think is best, but something was different this time. Maybe it was the number. 80? It feels monumental. It feels like a finish line you should be allowed to cross with some measure of dignity. I looked at the diamond ring on my right hand. The light from the fluorescent panels above caught the facets, sending out a spray of cold, hard fire. Amelia caught my gaze and her smile tightened. Of course, she continued, her voice taking on that cloying, patronizing tone she reserved for me, our priority is making sure Mom is comfortable. The new place has a lovely guest suite. It would be so much easier to have her with us, where we can keep an eye on her, the implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. That I was no longer capable. That my small, tidy home, the one my husband Robert and I had bought and paid for with 50 years of hard work, was suddenly unsuitable. That my independence was a problem to be managed. Mark cleared his throat. We were thinking, Clara, he began, using my first name in that way that was meant to sound friendly, but was actually a power play, that it would be a good time to liquidate some of your older assets. Consolidate things. Make it all easier to manage. There are those old savings bonds your father left, and there it was. The ask. Not even phrased as a question. A directive. I placed my fork down on the paper plate. The clink was barely audible, but in the bubble of conversation they had created, it sounded like a gavel. No, I said. The word was quiet, but it was firm. Amelia's performance faltered. Her smile flickered and died. What do you mean, no? I mean no, I repeated, looking directly at her. Those bonds are not to be touched. Your father and I had plans for that money. It was a lie, of a sort. The only plan was for it to be a safety net, my safety net. Not the financing for their next chapter of conspicuous consumption. Plans? Amelia scoffed, a nasty edge creeping into her voice. What plans could you possibly have? Mom, be reasonable. You're 80 years old. It's just sitting there, losing value nevertheless, I said, my own voice feeling foreign in its resolve. It's staying where it is. It's mine, and that's when it happened. Her face, a mask of brittle frustration, contorted. She stood up, pulling me slightly to the side as if to shield her actions from her friends, though they were all watching, frozen. Don't you understand, she hissed, her voice low and furious. We are trying to help you. You are becoming a burden. She punctuated the last word, burden, by raising her hand and slapping me across the face. It wasn't a hard slap. It was the insult of it that struck deep. A contemptuous, dismissive gesture. The shock was absolute. The room went utterly silent. Then, just as quickly, she grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging in. Oh, Mom, I'm so sorry, she stage whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear. You startled me. You know how your blood pressure worries me. Let's get you some water. It was a masterful piece of theater. In one swift motion, she had assaulted me and painted herself as the caring, concerned daughter dealing with a difficult, perhaps senile, mother. I just stood there, the sting on my cheek a cold fire, and I looked into my daughter's eyes. I saw nothing there. No remorse. No love. Just cold, hard calculation. In that moment, surrounded by strangers and the wreckage of my own birthday, I felt the last thread of maternal obligation snap. My life with Robert was not one of grand gestures or extravagant wealth. It was built on a foundation of quiet partnership and shared, modest dreams. We bought our small house in 1968. It had 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a garden that was mostly weeds, but to us it was a palace. We painted every room ourselves, picking out colors from hardware store swatches, laughing when we splattered more on ourselves than on the walls. Robert was an accountant, a man of numbers and quiet certainties. I worked part-time as a librarian. Our world was one of balanced checkbooks, packed lunches, and saving for a rainy day. That rainy day fund was sacred. Every week, we'd put a little aside, first in a coffee can, then in a proper savings account, and eventually, in the government bonds Mark was so eager to get his hands on. It wasn't for a new car, or a fancy vacation. It was for just in case the roof leaked, just in case one of us got sick, just in case the world threw something at us we couldn't predict. When Amelia was born, our world, already full, overflowed. She was our everything. Every decision from that point on was filtered through the lens of what was best for her. The rainy day fund's purpose shifted. It became the Amelia Fund. It paid for ballet lessons she quit after a month, a pony she rode twice, and summer camps she complained about endlessly. We never questioned it. We were parents. This is what parents did. Robert and I had a dream of our own. We wanted to see the Norwegian fjords. We had a postcard of Geirangefjord taped to our refrigerator for 30 years. We'd look at it on cold winter nights and talk about sailing through those majestic, silent waters. One day, Clara, Robert would say, squeezing my hand. When Amelia is settled, when the house is paid off. That will be our time, but our time never came. Robert got sick when Amelia was in her first year of university. The just-in-case had arrived. The fund we had so carefully built was decimated by medical bills that his insurance didn't fully cover. I never hesitated. I took on extra shifts at the library, then a second job cleaning offices at night. I would come home smelling of pine cleaner, my back aching, and I would sit at the kitchen table paying bill after bill. Amelia would call from her dorm room, complaining about her roommate, or how much reading she had to do for her sociology class. I never told her how bad things were. I didn't want to worry her. I would just listen, tell her I loved her, and then wire her more money for books or a new coat. That was my job. To absorb the hardship so she could soar. Robert passed away just before her graduation. My world tilted on its axis. The silence in our little house was a physical weight. But my grief had to be productive. I had to keep going for Amelia. I worked relentlessly, pouring every ounce of my energy and every spare dollar into her. I paid off the last of her student loans. When she announced her engagement to Mark, a man I instantly disliked for the way his eyes always seemed to be appraising our possessions, I paid for the wedding. A much grander wedding than we could afford, but she'd cried and said it was the one thing she'd always dreamed of. How could I say no? 2 years later, they wanted to buy their first house. They didn't have a down payment. They came to me, armed with a PowerPoint presentation Mark had made, full of charts about property values and return on investment. They presented it to me at my own kitchen table, as if I were a bank. I took out a second mortgage on my paid-off home, the palace Robert and I had built, to give them the money. It's an investment, Mom, Amelia had said, hugging me tightly. We'll pay you back, with interest. They never paid a dime. Over the years, the requests became more frequent, the gratitude more fleeting. It was money for a new car when Marx was acting up money for a private school for their son, Lucas, because the public schools were inadequate money for vacations to places I had only ever seen on postcards. Each time, I gave it. Each time, a little piece of my own security, my own dreams of the fjords, crumbled away. I was no longer a person to her. I was a utility. A well that never ran dry. The calls stopped unless they were a prelude to an ask. Visits became performative, rushed affairs. And then came the talk of my declining capabilities, the gentle suggestions that my house was too much for me. The concerned talk about my memory. It was a slow, insidious campaign to reframe me from a provider into a problem. A problem whose only solution was to have them take complete control. The slap wasn't a beginning. It was a culmination. It was the final, ugly flowering of a seed of entitlement I had spent a lifetime watering with my own sacrifice. I drove home from that mockery of a party in a daze. The familiar streets of my neighborhood seemed alien, the cozy glow of porch lights mocking. The sting on my cheek had faded to a dull, throbbing ache, but the echo of the word burden reverberated in the hollow space behind my ribs. It was a cold, heavy stone dropped into the deep well of my soul. I parked the car in my driveway, the same spot Robert had parked our old Ford for 40 years, and I sat in the darkness, the engine ticking as it cooled. I didn't cry. The time for tears was long past. This was something different. A feeling so cold and sharp it was almost clarifying. It was the feeling of a fever breaking. 4 years, decades even, I had been living with a low-grade infection of hope. The hope that one day Amelia would see me, truly see the woman who had given everything for her. The hope that she would grow into the compassionate, grateful daughter I had always imagined. The hope that the love I poured out would one day be returned, not in money, but in kind. The slap had been the final, brutal antibiotic. It killed the infection completely. There was no more hope. There was only the stark, unvarnished truth of my situation. I was not a mother to her anymore. I was an obstacle. An asset to be managed and, eventually, liquidated. I finally got out of the car and walked into my silent house. The smell of old books and lemon polish, a scent that had always meant comfort, now felt like the air in a museum exhibit of my own life. I walked through the small rooms, my hand trailing along the furniture Robert and I had picked out together. The sturdy oak dining table where we'd helped Amelia with her homework. The worn armchair where I had rocked her to sleep. These objects were saturated with memories, but suddenly, the memories were tainted, overlaid with the image of her face, twisted in contempt. I went into my bedroom and stood before the mirror on my dressing table. I looked at my reflection. An old woman looked back at me. 80 years old. Her hair was thin and white, her face a roadmap of worry lines. There was a faint red mark on her left cheek. But it was her eyes that held my attention. They weren't sad. They weren't angry. They were empty. Wiped clean. And in that emptiness, a tiny, hard spark ignited. It was the pilot light of my own survival. The decision, when it came, wasn't a dramatic lightning strike. It was a quiet, internal click, like a lock tumbling into place. I would not let my life end this way. I would not be erased. I would not be a footnote in the story of my daughter's ambition. My life with Robert had been about us. My life, as a mother, had been about how for the first time, I allowed a new thought to form, a thought so revolutionary it felt like a betrayal of everything I had ever been. What about me? What did I want? The answer was immediate and overwhelming. I wanted peace. I wanted quiet. I wanted to see the Norwegian fjords. I walked over to the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one that held my wedding dress and Robert's service medals. I knelt down, the joints in my knees protesting, and I opened it. The scent of cedar and thyme washed over me. I pushed aside the layers of tissue paper and memories until my fingers found the small, velvet-covered box. I opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded satin, was the diamond ring. But I didn't look at it. My target was something else, tucked beneath the box. It was a letter, in Robert's familiar, steady handwriting. His last letter to me. My hand trembled as I picked it up. He had given it to me a week before he passed, along with the ring. "Don't open it until you absolutely have to," he'd whispered, his voice weak. "Not until you need to save yourself." I had never opened it. Tonight, I needed to save myself. I broke the brittle seal. His words, written on a single sheet of paper, were my turning point. "My dearest Clara," it read. "If you are reading this, it means the world has failed to be kind to you, and I am not there to stand in its way. Remember our promise. You are not just a wife or a mother. You are Clara. You are a force. That ring is not a memory of me. It's your future. It's your escape hatch. Use it. Don't look back. Go see the fjords for both of us. Your life is your own. It always was. I love you forever." Robert, reading those words, I felt his presence, his unwavering belief in me. The emptiness in my eyes was filled with a cold, clear purpose. The decision was made. The war had been declared in a single, vicious whisper, but the strategy for my victory was about to be written in the clear, steady hand of my late husband. The diamond ring was our secret, Robert's and mine. To Amelia, it was just Mom's gaudy old ring, a piece of costume jewelry I wore on special occasions. She'd once picked it up from my dresser, held it between her thumb and forefinger with disdain, and said, "Honestly, Mom, you should get rid of this. It's so tacky." I just smiled and said, "Your father gave it to me." I let her believe it was a simple anniversary gift, something of sentimental value, but little else. Her dismissal of it was a gift. Her ignorance became my greatest shield. The truth was far more spectacular. Robert, a man of numbers by trade, was a geologist by passion. He spent his weekends hiking, his pockets filled with interesting rocks, his head filled with knowledge about strata and formations. On our 25th anniversary, we took a trip to Arkansas, to a state park where you could dig for your own diamonds. It was a silly, romantic getaway. We spent 2 days in the dirt, laughing and finding nothing but mud-caked quartz. On the last afternoon, just as we were packing up, Robert's shovel hit something. It wasn't a sparkling, cut gem from a movie. It was a dull, yellowish, oddly shaped stone, about the size of a robin's egg. He knew immediately. I had never seen him so excited, so animated. He secreted it away, and for months, he corresponded with experts, sending them photographs and descriptions. The verdict was unanimous: it was an exceptionally rare, flawless canary diamond. A freak of nature. We were, on paper, suddenly wealthy. We sat at our kitchen table for hours, the stone sitting between us on a cloth napkin, and we talked. We could sell it. We could pay off the house, buy a new car, take that trip to the fjords 10 times over. We could give Amelia a life of unimaginable ease. But then Robert, in his quiet wisdom, said something I never forgot. "Clara, money like this doesn't solve problems. It just creates new ones. If we cash this in, we'll become different people. Amelia will grow up with expectations we can't sustain. Let's keep it. Let's let it be our secret, our ultimate safety net," and so we did. It became our silent partner. Years later, when he was sick and I was working 2 jobs, I was tempted. I would look at the stone, hidden in its box, and think of the relief it could bring. But I always remembered his words. This wasn't for paying bills. This was for something bigger. A few weeks before he died, he called me to his bedside. He pressed the velvet box into my hand. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The dull, yellowish stone was gone. In its place was the ring. He had used the last of his energy and a small portion of our savings to have a trusted jeweler in another state cut and set the diamond. It was magnificent. A huge, cushion-cut canary diamond, surrounded by smaller white diamonds, set in platinum. It was far too grand for our simple life, which was the point. It was a disguise. "It looks like something a movie star would wear," I'd whispered. He smiled, a weak but genuine smile. "Let them think it's fake, Clara. Let them underestimate it. Let them underestimate you. This is for your dream. Not for a down payment on a house, not for a wedding, not for anyone else's life. It's for you. It's your escape hatch. Promise me you'll only use it to save yourself," I promised. And for over 20 years, I kept that promise. I wore the gaudy ring, and I endured Amelia's condescension. I allowed her to believe I was a simple old woman with dwindling resources, a future liability. The dramatic irony was a secret comfort, a private joke between me and Robert's memory. The day after the slap, I woke with a singular purpose. I made an appointment with a discreet, high-end jeweler and appraiser in the city, a man Mr. Davies would later recommend, whose name I found in Robert's old papers. I dressed carefully, not in my usual subdued florals, but in a smart black suit I hadn't worn in years. I put on the ring. It felt different on my finger that day. Not heavy, but powerful. The appraiser, a distinguished man with a jeweller's loop permanently attached to his eye, took the ring. He was silent for a long time, turning it under the light, examining it from every angle. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, my heart beating a steady, determined rhythm. Finally, he looked up at me, his professional composure broken by a look of sheer awe. "Madam," he said, his voice hushed. "Do you have any idea what you have here?" "I have some idea," I replied calmly. He proceeded to tell me. He spoke of carats and clarity, of color and cut. He used words like extraordinary, museum quality, and once in a lifetime, and then he gave me the number. The valuation was astronomical. It was more money than Robert or I could have ever imagined. Enough to buy Amelia's dream house 10 times over. Enough to fund 100 trips to the fjords. It was enough to buy my freedom. I listened to his explanation, nodded, and then I said the words I had been waiting 20 years to say. "I'd like to sell it." The appraiser's eyebrows shot up. "Sell it? A piece like this belongs in a collection, or an auction at Sotheby's." "I'm not a collector," I said, my voice as cold and clear as the diamonds on my hand. "And I don't have time for an auction. I want a private sale." As quickly and quietly as possible, he understood. He saw the resolve in my eyes. This wasn't a woman parting with a trinket. This was a woman liquidating her past to finance her future. As I left his office, the city streets seemed brighter. The weight on my finger was gone, replaced by an even greater weight in my bank account. The escape hatch was open. I had the fuel, the map, and the will to fly. The first phone call I made was to Arthur Davies. He had been Robert's lawyer and, over the years, had become a quiet friend. Arthur was a man of impeccable integrity and profound discretion, the exact opposite of my son-in-law, Mark. I asked to meet him at his office the next day. When I walked in, he greeted me with his usual gentle warmth, but his eyes were sharp. He saw the faint bruise on my cheek, the new steel in my spine. I didn't have to say much. I told him about the party, the slap, the word burden. I told him about the years of financial and emotional drainage. He listened without interruption, his hands steepled on his broad mahogany desk. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes or sympathies. He simply nodded and said, "I'm not surprised, Clara. I am only sorry it has come to this. Robert always worried it would." His validation was like a balm on a raw wound. It erased any lingering doubt, any whisper of guilt. "Robert also made provisions," he continued, pulling a thick file from his drawer. "He left me a letter of instruction, to be acted upon at your sole discretion." He called it the Clara Protocol. A small, sad smile touched my lips. Of course he did. My Robert, always 5 steps ahead. For the next 3 hours, Arthur and I waged a silent, bloodless coup. We went over every single one of my assets. The house, which was, thank God, solely in my name. The savings bonds. My modest pension. And the proceeds from the sale of the ring, which had been wired that morning into a new account at a new bank, an account to which only Arthur and I had the keys. Arthur was brilliant. He moved with the calm, lethal efficiency of a chess master. First, he drew up the papers for an irrevocable trust. This was the fortress. Every penny I had, every asset, including my house, was to be transferred into this trust. The trust's sole beneficiary was me. The sole trustee was Arthur Davies. Its instructions were explicit: to provide for my comfort, my security, and my dreams for the remainder of my life. Upon my death, the remaining funds would not go to Amelia. They would be distributed among 3 charities Robert and I had always supported: a local animal shelter, a children's literacy program, and a research fund for the disease that took him from me. I signed the documents with a steady hand. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a chain breaking. Next, we dealt with Amelia. Arthur advised against cutting her off completely and immediately. We give her nothing to contest, he said. We will be methodical. I wrote a check to her, a final one. It was for a small, specific amount, exactly enough to cover the property taxes on her current home, a bill I knew was due. I enclosed it in an envelope with a short, simple, devastatingly polite note. Dearest Amelia, it read. I hope this helps. I am restructuring my finances for my retirement and will be unable to provide further assistance. I wish you and Mark all the best in your ventures. Love, Mother. The word love felt like a lie, but Arthur insisted. It was for legal protection. The finality was in the rest of the sentence. While I wrote, Arthur was on the phone with my bank manager, a man I'd known for 30 years. He gave instructions. A block was to be placed on any and all inquiries from Amelia or Mark concerning my accounts. My phone number was to be removed from their list of approved contacts. Any attempt by them to co-sign, transfer, or access funds was to be flagged and reported directly to him. The last piece of the strategy was my home. You don't have to decide now, Clara, Arthur said gently. But the trust can sell the house whenever you're ready. You could live anywhere in the world. I thought of the fjords. I thought of a small apartment with a balcony overlooking the sea. A place with no memories of duty or disappointment. We'll sell it, I said. As soon as possible, I left Arthur's office that afternoon feeling lighter than I had in 30 years. I had walked in as a victim, a burden. I walked out as the CEO of my own life. That evening, I did something small but deeply symbolic. I went into my kitchen, took the garish blue Happy 80th mug Amelia had given me for my birthday, the one with a picture of her and Mark smiling their false smiles, and I dropped it into the trash can. I then made myself a cup of tea in Robert's favorite old cup, the one with a small chip on the rim, and I sat in my quiet living room, the trust documents in a neat pile on the coffee table. The war was not over, but the first battle had been won without a single shot fired. The enemy didn't even know it was under siege. The silence that followed was beautiful. For a full week, there were no calls, no texts, no passive-aggressive emails. I imagined Amelia receiving my check and the note. She would have been irritated, certainly. Restructuring my finances, she would have scoffed to Mark. What finances? She would see it as a temporary inconvenience, a silly little power play by an old woman getting sentimental in her dotage. She had no idea. I spent that week in a state of productive peace. I began to sort through my house, room by room. It wasn't just cleaning, it was an archaeological dig through my own life. I packed away Robert's things with a gentle sadness, not the sharp grief of before. I boxed up old photo albums, keeping only a few precious pictures of a younger, happier Amelia, a little girl with bright eyes who hadn't yet learned the language of entitlement. The rest, the posed family portraits where my smile never quite reached my eyes, I discarded. I was curating my own history, deciding what was worthy of keeping. A real estate agent, recommended by Arthur, came to the house. She was a kind, efficient woman who saw not an old lady's clutter, but good bones, and charming original features. She planted a for sale sign in my front yard. It felt like a flag of liberation. The panic began on a Tuesday. It was the day the down payment for their level-up house was due. My phone, which had been blissfully silent, rang at 9:05 a.m. It was Amelia. I looked at her name on the screen, took a calm sip of my tea, and let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a message popped up. I listened to it on speakerphone, my hand steady as I tended to my African violets on the windowsill. Mom? It's me. Her voice was tight with forced casualness. Listen, I don't know what's going on, but the transfer for the house didn't go through. Did you forget? Call me back. Immediately, an hour later, another call. Another voicemail. This one was less casual. Mom, seriously. Mark is on the phone with the realtor. They are going to give the house to the backup offer if we don't get the funds to them by noon. What is going on? Are you okay? Did you fall? I'm getting worried. The faint concern was almost comical. She wasn't worried about me, she was worried about her 5-bedroom fantasy slipping through her fingers. Then came the texts, a rapid-fire barrage of digital desperation. Mom, call me MOM, the bank won't talk to me, they said they need your authorization, what does that even mean? Mark is furious. You are embarrassing us, pick up the phone. By noon, the tone shifted from panic to accusatory. The voicemails became tirades. It was Mark this time. Clara, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not funny, his voice was slick with rage. You promised. You made a promise to Amelia. You're sabotaging our future. You call us back right now, or I swear, we will come over there and sort this out. The empty threat made me smile. Sort what out? My finances, which were now locked away behind a legal iron wall. My decision, which was as firm as the granite in the foundations of this house. The afternoon brought a new tactic, emotional blackmail. It was Amelia again, her voice thick with fake tears. Mom. I don't understand why you're doing this to me. After everything I do for you. I try so hard to take care of you, and you punish me. Don't you love me anymore? I listened to that message and felt nothing. The well she had been drawing from for so long had finally run dry. There was not a single drop of guilt left in me to give her. The climax of their panic arrived at 4 o'clock, in the form of furious banging on my front door. I looked through the peephole. It was both of them, Amelia's face blotchy and tear-streaked, Mark's a mask of thunderous rage. Mom? Open this door. Amelia screamed. We know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway. I stood there, on my side of the solid oak door, Robert and I had hung together, and I felt an incredible sense of calm. They could shout. They could bang. They could threaten. But they could not get in. My house, for the first time in a very long time, was truly my sanctuary. I walked away from the door, went into the kitchen, and continued sorting through my recipe cards, the sound of their fury a distant, irrelevant storm. They had built their entire world on the assumption of my compliance. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my generosity for an obligation. They were now standing in the ruins of that assumption, screaming into a void, and they had absolutely no idea how to handle it. Their panic was the first dividend payment from my investment in myself. After 2 days of their relentless siege on my phone and my front door, I decided it was time for the final act. They deserved an explanation, not for their sake, but for mine. I needed to articulate my independence, to speak the truth into the space between us and then walk away from it forever. I wouldn't do it in my home, the sanctuary they had defiled with their greed. And I wouldn't do it in theirs, the house built on my sacrifices. I instructed Arthur to arrange a meeting at his office. A neutral ground, a place of law and order where tantrums and manipulations would hold no currency. Arthur called Mark and informed him, in his dry, formal tone, that Mrs. Clara Albright would grant them a 30-minute meeting to discuss the situation. The fact that I was communicating through a lawyer sent them into a fresh spiral of panic, which was precisely the intention. They arrived at Arthur's stately, wood-paneled office looking like shipwreck survivors. Amelia's eyes were red and swollen, her expensive clothes looking rumpled. Mark's face was pale, his usual smug confidence replaced by a twitchy, anxious energy. They looked at me as I sat in a leather armchair beside Arthur's desk, and for the first time, I think they saw me not as their mother, but as an adversary. It was a start. Mom, thank God, Amelia began, her voice trembling as she rushed towards me. We were so worried. We thought something terrible had happened to you. Why didn't you answer your phone? We need to get you to a doctor, get you assessed. It was their last, desperate play, the senility card. Arthur cleared his throat, a sound like gravel dropping onto a coffin lid. Please sit, he said, gesturing to the two chairs opposite his desk. They Saturday. The power dynamic in the room was palpable. They were no longer petitioners at the court of Mom. They were defendants. What is this? Mark blustered, trying to reclaim some semblance of control. Why are we talking to a lawyer? This is a family matter. It stopped being a family matter, Mark, I said, my voice calm and even, when my daughter slapped me and called me a burden on my 80th birthday. The words landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. Amelia flinched as if I'd slapped her back. Her face went from pale to crimson. I was upset, she stammered. You weren't yourself. I was scared. No, Amelia, I said, leaning forward slightly. For the first time in a very long time, I was entirely myself. And I was listening. I've been listening for years. Listening to you and Mark talk about your next big purchase while I ate my dinner alone. Listening to you describe my home as too much for me and my mind as slipping. I listened to you plan my obsolescence. I turned to Mark. You wanted to liquidate my assets, Mark. To consolidate them. Was that for my benefit, or for the down payment on your 5-bedroom house with the pool? He opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer. Amelia tried again, tears welling in her eyes. But we love you, Mom. We just want what's best for you. Having you live with us, that was about keeping you safe. Let me ask you a question, Amelia, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. If you had known that my gaudy old ring was a world-class canary diamond worth more than your new house, your cars, and your country club membership combined, would you still have been so concerned about my safety? Or would your concern have been focused on securing that asset for yourselves? The silence that followed was absolute. I had laid the ugly, greedy truth of their hearts bare on Arthur's mahogany desk, and it was undeniable. Their faces, stripped of all pretense, were a grotesque mixture of shock, fury, and, most tellingly, avarice. They were looking at me, really looking at me, and they weren't seeing their mother. They were seeing a vault door that had just slammed shut in their faces. Arthur then took over, his voice a dispassionate drone, as he laid out the new reality. He explained the existence of the irrevocable trust. He detailed the sale of the ring. He informed them that my house was on the market. He explained that all of my affairs were now managed by his firm, and that my will had been rewritten to exclude them entirely. With every sentence, I watched the color drain from their faces. The final vestiges of their hope crumbled. You can't do this, Amelia finally whispered, her voice cracking. I'm your daughter. It's my inheritance. An inheritance is a gift, Amelia, not a right, I said, standing up. You receive it upon death. But I am not dead. In fact, I have never felt more alive. My gift to you was a lifetime of support. You squandered it. The slap was just the receipt for services rendered. My love for you was unconditional. Your love for me, I have learned, came with a price tag. And my account is now closed. I looked at my daughter, the stranger sitting before me, and I felt a pang, not of love, but of a distant, sorrowful pity. Pity for what she had become. Pity for what she had thrown away for the sake of a bigger kitchen. Arthur slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was a restraining order, preventing them from contacting me, coming to my home, or inquiring about my affairs. Sign it, Arthur said, or we will have it enforced by the courts. Your choice. They stared at the paper, as if it were a snake. Defeated, they signed it. I walked out of that office without a backward glance. I did not say goodbye. There was nothing left to say. The 30-year performance of a happy family was over. The curtain had fallen. And I was finally, blessedly, free. The silence that followed the confrontation was different from the silence of that first week. It wasn't a temporary quiet, pregnant with impending panic. It was a deep, profound, and permanent peace. The restraining order worked its magic. The phone calls stopped. The emails ceased. The banging on my door was replaced by the gentle rustle of leaves in the garden. It was the sound of my new life beginning. My house sold in less than a month for more than I expected. The day I signed the closing papers, I felt a surprising pang of sadness, not for the house itself, but for the ghost of the young woman I had been when I first walked through its door, full of dreams for a future that had unfolded so differently than I'd planned. But the sadness was fleeting, quickly replaced by a surge of exhilarating possibility. I was 80 years old, homeless, and utterly, gloriously untethered. With Arthur's help, I found a small, modern apartment in a managed community a few hours down the coast. It wasn't a retirement home in the way Amelia had envisioned for me, a place of managed decline. It was a vibrant community of active, independent people. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, with a wide balcony that looked out over the endless, shimmering expanse of the ocean. The first morning I woke up there, I made a cup of coffee and sat on that balcony, wrapped in a blanket, and watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. I breathed in the salty air, and I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't felt in years. I belonged to myself. I spent the next few months rediscovering Clara. I had spent so long being Robert's wife and then Amelia's mother, that I had almost forgotten the person who existed before and beneath those roles. I joined a book club. I took a pottery class, delighting in the feeling of cool clay spinning beneath my clumsy fingers. I made friends, real friends, who were interested in my opinions on literature and politics, not on the status of my assets. They knew nothing of my past, of Amelia, of the slap. To them, I was just Clara, the witty woman with a surprising knowledge of geology and a love for a good noir novel. I was starting over. And then, one crisp autumn morning, I logged onto my computer and I did it. I booked a 2-week cruise. To Norway. To see the fjords. I booked a cabin for one, with a private balcony. As I clicked confirm, I felt Robert's presence so strongly it was as if he was standing behind me, his hand on my shoulder. We were finally going. I sent a postcard to Arthur from the ship. It was a picture of Geirangerfjord, the exact same view that had been taped to our refrigerator for 30 years. On the back, I wrote, "It's even more beautiful than we imagined. Thank you for everything. The air is clean up here, the journey was magnificent." I stood on the deck of the ship, as it glided through the still, dark waters, cliffs rising like ancient giants on either side. The silence was absolute, a sacred quiet that was the polar opposite of the vacuum of silence in that community room. This silence was full. Full of peace, full of majesty, full of the quiet triumph of a promise kept. I thought about Amelia once, during that trip. I was sitting on my balcony, watching a waterfall cascade down a sheer rock face. I wondered what she was doing. Was she happy in her smaller, less grand house? Did she ever feel a flicker of remorse? I realized, with a sense of profound liberation, that I didn't care. Her life was her own story now, and I was no longer a character in it. My pity had evaporated, replaced by a calm indifference. She had chosen her path. I had chosen mine. I returned from my trip renewed. I had faced the ghosts of my past and made peace with them. I had fulfilled the dream of my marriage. Now, my life was a blank page. I could fill it with anything I chose. Some days, I volunteer at the local library, the scent of old paper and binding glue a comforting return to my younger self. Other days, I simply sit on my balcony, watch the tides roll in and out, and feel grateful. I am not lonely. I am solitary. There is a world of difference between the two. Loneliness is a lack. Solitude is a presence. It's the presence of yourself. I had to travel 80 years to finally meet the woman I was meant to be. She is strong. She is independent. She is peaceful. And she is free. So that is my story. The story of how a slap on my 80th birthday became my declaration of independence. It's funny, in a way. My daughter and her husband saw me as a thing. A bank account to be drained, a problem to be managed, a burden to be housed. They spent years trying to chip away at my autonomy, piece by piece, all under the guise of love and concern. But they miscalculated. They underestimated the foundation. They thought they were chipping away at soft sandstone when, all along, they were striking against a solid diamond they were too blind to see. They wanted my money, but what they really wanted was my power. They wanted the power to define my life, to write my final chapter. The greatest victory was not in keeping the money, it was in seizing the pen back and writing an ending they could never have conceived of. An ending where the old woman doesn't fade away into a grateful, dependent dotage in a guest suite. An ending where she gets on a plane and goes to see the world. They thought the story was about their inheritance. But it was always about mine. The inheritance left to me by my husband wasn't just a ring, it was the permission to value myself. The inheritance I am leaving for myself is a life of peace, dignity, and self-determination. For so long, I defined my worth by how much I could give to others, especially to my child. I believed that a good mother was a bottomless well, that self-sacrifice was the highest form of love. I was wrong. Love without respect is just exploitation. Family should be a harbor, not a weight that drags you under. You can spend a lifetime carrying your family on your back, but you must never let them mistake you for the ground beneath their feet. They called me a burden, but the only burden I ever truly carried was the crushing weight of their expectations and their bottomless entitlement. Setting that down was the lightest I have ever felt. Now, I want to ask you. What would you have done in my position? At what point does a parent's duty to their child end, and their duty to themselves begin? Is there a line? And if so, where do you draw it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I will read every single one. Your stories, your perspectives, they matter. They create a community where people like us, people who have been underestimated, can feel seen and heard. If my story resonated with you, if it gave you a sliver of strength, or a moment of validation, then please, subscribe to this channel and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing in the world is knowing you are not alone. And remembering that it is never, ever too late to take back your own story. Thank you for listening.